Today, I'm going to go over my race recap of the 2020 Houston Marathon. 26.2 miles, 3 hours, 17 minutes, 12 seconds, 167 beats per minute on the day. Not exactly the day I was hoping for, but it's the day that my body had to give. And I think there's a couple of things that I could have done differently. But ultimately, I think this is the level of fitness where I'm at. And it's like, you can be frustrated with it, but how can you be frustrated with the best that your body had to give? So ultimately, very happy with it. It gives me a lot of clean data to work with in terms of what I need to do moving forward. And ultimately, a great race, great people, and ultimately a great time. So I'll go over all of that today. The three things that I'm going to go over are kind of my race plan execution, which I think was like kind of a big story for today for me. Two is pacing. I'm going to talk a lot about pacing as well, a little bit separately from the race plan, but I'll talk about pacing more kind of broadly. And the third thing I'll talk about is kind of some of the other details that you guys have been asking a lot about that I think are important, but not, I think, central to like the huge story and what I was trying to get out of this particular day. So the first thing I'll talk about to get it kind of out of the way is kind of the gear and the other stuff that I was wearing. Temps were in the mid 40s in Houston. There wasn't too much humidity. I think it was in the 50s or 60s. I could be wrong on that exactly, but it didn't feel humid. It didn't feel cold, but I hopped out of my hotel room in the morning with what I was planning to wear for the race, which was long tights, very thin long tights, but full tights anyway. Shorts on top of that to give myself some pockets to put my gels in. And then a t-shirt, and not this t-shirt, but a t-shirt and arm sleeves and gloves and then a hat. And I felt like that was about right, if not a bit warm, but it was gusty, windy in terms of the wind conditions. And so whenever it was not windy, it was fine, a little bit warm, I felt. But whenever the wind picked up and it was intermittent, I felt cold. So I felt like that's probably the right amount of stuff for me to wear. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we look at some of the footage and go over some of the race in a little bit more detail. For the shoe, I wore the Carbon Rocket, which I thought would be a risky choice, but hopefully I thought would be the right choice for me. I love the carbon plate in this shoe. I feel like it's an exciting shoe to run in. It's a 1mm heel drop, but I spend very little time in this part of the shoe anyway as I'm running at marathon paces. And so I didn't think it'd be a huge deal. I've run long distances in it before. Ultimately, it ended up being not the best choice for me. My feet, I've always said my feet aren't that strong, and I should have listened to myself on that one. My feet weren't strong enough to really handle this shoe for that long of a distance. So I definitely regretted having it on. I started feeling it even as early as mile 5, but then I was like, no, that's my mind just kind of playing games with me and starting to insert little doubts here and there. But by the time I was at 15 and 18, I was like, oh, I needed more cushion. I just need more cushion in the forefoot for a marathon shoe. Otherwise, the shoe was fantastic in terms of giving me that carbon plate feeling, being able to get up on my toes, and being able to focus. It did make me have to think a little bit more about my foot strike, very similar to how an Adidas Adios 4 would have to make me think about my foot strike to really get the most out of the shoe. But ultimately, I thought that that's not necessarily a bad thing. Give me something to focus on in the later stages of the race that I thought would work out well. And I think ultimately that was fine as well. I just need a little bit more protection for the pads of my feet as I get to the later stages of the race. Now, the other things I want to talk about are the race plan execution and my pacing overall. The race plan execution was horrible for me. This was my first time training with low heart rate as a training style. My first race running any considerable amount of distance, or my first race having trained for low heart rate. And I didn't give low heart rate training, full 3 or 4 months that most people give it to it. So I was where I was, but the plan was to start out in the 158s to 162, and then gradually build up to kind of the mid 170s by the end of the race. This race, I died at around mile 23. Definitely just hit the wall, had nothing left in there, although around 21 is where the drop-off really starts to happen. Basically, I went out too fast. I let the heart rate get too high too early. I got too excited. And that leads me to my second kind of point for today, which is pacing overall. I'm starting to realize that there's really like 3 kinds of pace when it comes to the marathon. There's like the pace that you want, like your goal pace, the one in your mind that you want. The other kind of pace is your ideal pace, based on where you are right now, that day, lining up the amount of sleep, the amount of nutrition, the hydration, weather conditions, all that. On that day, what's the ideal pace that you can run, given all the variables put in? And then in the middle between that is your real pace, the pace that you actually run based on your ideal pace and your ability to execute a marathon race plan. I felt disappointed after the race, or while I was dying and walking on the course in my death march. I felt disappointed in myself because that day pace, my real pace, wasn't anywhere near my goal pace. But the difference between my goal pace and even the best pace, my ideal pace that I could have run on that day, was pretty far apart. And I knew that going into the taper, I knew that. But that last week of work, like my peak week and the taper, kind of had me thinking about potential a lot. And I confused potential with my actuality. And I think that's where some of that gap is. But overall, for my current level of fitness, which is not where I want it to be, but it is where it is. And overall, despite some of the execution errors that I've made, the 317 is where I'm at, and I feel like it's a pretty solid result. Gives me stuff to work with going further. So that's kind of the overall summary for those of you who don't want to sit through a 20-minute video. But for more detail, I will go through things in a little bit more detail now. And I'm going to go to the Polar Flow app, and we're going to take a look at things in kind of like 5K-ish increments. So I'm going to jump over to my computer. And what I want to do is take a look at things through Polar Flow. It gives me a little bit more insight into some of the heart rate number, which is the thing that I really wanted ultimately to get out of this race. Deep down in my heart, I knew this was not a 3-hour marathon kind of day in my mind, and I wanted it to be. I really wanted it to be. I wanted it to kind of be like a surprise, hey, I did it, or I got surprised, hey, I got really close. That's kind of what I was like, best case scenario, but obviously that's not where I'm at. So let's take a look at this, and I'm going to maximize the graphs here so we could take a little bit of a closer look at it. What we're taking a look at here, the top graph is heart rate, then pace, and then power. I don't need to look at cadence because I don't really pay attention to cadence personally. So we'll turn that off, and then we'll look at the altitude just so we can have that to kind of correlate it together. Quick note, when we look at the heart rate and the power graphs, they look pretty similar, almost identical, except when we're getting to hills. Then when we're at hills, they look a little bit different. But all that is kind of like the stuff that makes sense for me. One note, I am using the Polar Vantage V, but I'm also using it with the Stride Foot Pod, so the power numbers are coming from the Stride Foot Pod and not the Vantage V, which tends to give numbers that are a little bit higher than the Stride Foot Pod does. But what I really want to do, because these graphs are kind of like hard, other than seeing that, like, yes, definitely I hit the wall and died at the end. I think that if we take it into smaller chunks, we can see a little bit more what was really going on. So what I'm going to do is try trim this down. So we're looking at just the first 5K of it. So let's do that. So we'll get to about 3.1 miles right here, and we'll take a look at the graphs now. And so what happened was I had a pretty decent warm-up. There's lots of spaces to warm up. There's plenty of places to go to the bathroom at this race, just fantastically organized. There's some in the expo hall. There's some when you leave the expo hall. There's some when you get closer to your corral. And there's some like even pretty much right at the corral. So there's just plenty of spots to go to the bathroom. There's plenty of time to get in and out of the corral if you need to be able to do that. So I was worried that there would be some sort of traffic jam or bottleneck at some point. So I didn't warm up quite as much as I should have. But I probably got about a 5-minute warm up in. I wish I had done more. But the gun goes off, we get moving, and right away my heart rate feels like it's a little bit high. And I'm attributing that to not really warming up. So what I do is I just hang back and I let people kind of go around me, and I'm just trying to stay within like the 160 range at the beginning of the race. That lasted for about 2.5 minutes. And then at that point, I'm running like 7-minute 30 or even 8-minute miles. This is just, there's too much gap for me to pick up. Again, my mind's getting in the way of what I know I need to be doing. Or I guess my insecurity is getting in the way. So I start running a little bit faster than I really wanted to be, at least in that first 5K. But I'm still within kind of my range. I'd set up my zones on my watch. So that way I was at like 158 to 168 for zone 4. And then I locked the watch at zone 4. So anytime I'm not in that range, the watch would start beeping and freaking out at me. So I'm staying pretty much within the range. The paces are in the 720s, which I knew they were in the 720s and it bothered me a little bit, but I'm like, hey, this is my warm up. I usually warm up for about 20 minutes. So let's wait 20 minutes until we see what happens there. And then at the 20-minute mark, that's when I was like, all right, now I'm warmed up. Let's start to make some moves. And so you could see my heart rate gets a little bit higher. And I'm like, I think that maybe already I'm worried about pace and what it's going to mean for my overall time for the day. And I'm like, well, what if I run just like a little bit hotter? Maybe if I run in I think at like 171, 172, maybe 173 is where my body starts to go anaerobic. So maybe I could just run under 171 for a little while. And so I'm trying to play around with that and trying to like eke as much like pace as I can. It's only 5K in, but already I'm freaking out about that. And let me show you guys some footage from the 5K mark. It didn't make it into the ultimate video, but I did take some in-race footage at the 5K mark. So I'll show that to you now.
All right, just hit the 5K mark, about 23 minutes. Heart rate seems a little bit high compared to the plan of what I was hoping for, but I think I'm gonna go a little bit higher on the heart rate than I was originally planning. I'm feeling good. This pace feels pretty easy, so and it should, but feeling good.
Yeah, so pretty much the exact same thing that I'm talking about, where I'm starting to get antsy, but at least I'm saying the right things to myself so far. And I'm restraining myself, which is exactly what I needed to be doing. So then let's take a look at the next 5K, and I'll go out to about 10K here, and then trim this down in so that we're starting at 5K. And then for this section, the heart rate average is 166 beats per minute, as I could see on the bottom there, averaging about 7 minutes per mile, which is pretty much right where I wanted to be. I lined up that morning with the 7 minute per mile kind of, there was like not a group, but a sign that said 7 minutes per mile line up here, which I think was more for the half marathoners than it was for the marathoners, but that's where I stood and that's where I lined up. So I feel like I'm doing kind of the right thing here. I felt like I was still, again, dancing around this 168 mark, but I felt like this was a good place for me to be at. Here, my heart rate spiked a little bit. Not really sure what was going on there, but it did spike for a moment. I did kind of pick up the pace a little bit. I don't know if I was going around a group or what I was doing, trying to move around. Sometimes when I shoot video as I'm running, it makes my heart rate go up a little bit, depending on like the way that I'm holding it, the camera and the stick. It just, it's a little bit of a strain. So I think that's what's going on right there, because the altitude is dead flat. So there's nothing else really going on around there. But then at the 10K mark, again, I'm still feeling like the pace feels slow. I'm feeling really strong, feeling really good. I'm holding myself back though. That's a clip that you saw yesterday. So then let's move to the next 5K. I won't do every 5K, but this is the last kind of 5K increment I'll go to. And we'll go to about 9.3 miles. And we'll move this up to 6.2. And then for this stretch, we're looking at about 3.06 mile, 168 beats per minute, 21 minutes for that 5K, at least according to the Polar. I know my splits are slightly different on my actual official time, but by this, my average pace is 6:56 per minute, so still really good, right where I want it. There was a hill right at the kind of 10K mark or ish area. You can see my heart rate goes up, the power required goes up, and then the pace, I was speeding up there on the downhill and really taking advantage of that. And then once I got to the bottom of that hill, not that it was a huge hill, but towards the bottom of that, I really kind of slowed down a little bit. I realized my heart was racing from the little uphill that we had, and then tried to get back towards that 168 range. And here I'm starting to get a little bit impatient. I'm worried again about, you know, what my time is going to be for the day. And I'm still kind of dancing around this 168 mark and paying a lot too much attention to the instantaneous pace on my watch. And so that's what's going on there. Let me show you another clip from the 15K mark.
All right, they are packing up the LD water tables. Means we're at the 15K mark. Feeling good. I've been at the top of my range, about 168, 169 for heart rate, and it's ending up to be a little bit slower than I want, but I think that's the right pace for me for today. Just want to stay the course for now, see how we do.
So again, it looks like I'm sweating a ton, but you could see it's only on like the one side because the wind was coming at me from kind of this direction. I didn't feel sweaty at all when I ran this race. And like, if you had asked me at any point in the race, like, why are you so sweaty? I would have completely denied that I had even a drop of sweat on me. If anything, I felt cold through most of the race. Maybe it's because the sweat was evaporating and getting hit by the wind, and that's what was going on. But yeah, something that was really surprising was as I was going through and editing the video that I was so sweaty. I didn't feel that at all. So not really sure what to make of that. But that's the 15K. I'm still saying the right things in my mind. I'm still restraining myself because I'm thinking there's so much race left. I'm not even at the 10-mile mark. So I'm restraining myself, and I feel like so far everything's going great. I'm running a near like perfect for what I'm capable of running that day kind of race. So let's now move up to the half marathon mark. And now I'll take a look at it at a bigger chunk. So we'll take a look at it. Well, I guess we could look at, let's look at 9.3 up to the half marathon mark. Let's look at that first. So then we'll go up to 13.1. And for this stretch, it's a little bit short, another 3.83 miles, so a little bit longer than 5K in here. 7 minutes, 2 seconds per mile, 169 beats per minute, which is about fine. So I'm feeling good about that there. Still dancing around this 168 mark, which is right around where I think I need to be for the level of, for I don't even think just the level of fitness, like for my age and for my respiratory strength. That's where I think I wanted to be, and I think that was a really good spot for me to be. Then at some point, I think we get a little bit of rollers here, plus or minus 5 feet in elevation, and for whatever reason, that just sets my heart rate off. It's amazing how sensitive it can be. And then I think what's also happening here is that I start to see a pace group ahead of me. Like whenever we hit a turn, I could see that like, okay, there's a pace group ahead that I can catch up to, and I start getting really antsy. I'm also realizing that I'm close to the halfway mark and I'm about to make a change, which ends up being, spoiler alert, not a great change. But so I'm getting a little bit antsy here. And so that's what's going on. Nothing going on with the course really, is nice and flat. And then we hit like the one hill of the course, which is just a bridge, an overpass that you go over. And we hit that. My heart rate spikes all the way up to like the 180s up in here. And then that's the end of that kind of part where after I come down the hill, you do this little hairpin turn, which is kind of like annoying, but you do the hairpin turn and then you go under a bridge. And at that point, I'm thinking, okay, there is that pace group, which I thought at the time was the 3:05 pace group. But someone else recognized me from the race and we ran together for a moment. And he was like, no, that's the 3:10 pace group. And at this point, like my alarm bells ran off and like what I thought I wanted for the day and my race plan, I kind of threw the race plan away. And I said, all right, I'm turning the limiter off because I felt strong still at that point, but I should have, it was only halfway through. And I turned the heart rate limiter off my watch. And I say, you know what, I'm not gonna worry about what my heart rate is. I'm gonna really see what my like respiratory system is really made of at this point. And I'm gonna run by feel. And by feel, what that meant is I'm gonna catch that 3:10 pace group and pass it and hopefully finish closer towards the 3:05 pace group. So, and that's kind of what I was talking about yesterday in the in-race footage. So now let's talk about what happened for that next stretch. And we'll go to about mile 23 from the halfway point. So 13.1 and all right, we got 10 miles starting at about the halfway point to about the 23-mile point. And that's 173 beats per minute, which is for me my anaerobic range. That's where I think it starts. And then 7 minutes, 7 seconds per minute for that average. And let's take a look at what's going on with my heart rate. So my heart rate is clearly above what I thought was a prudent space to be in at that early stage in the race. Now this is like this range, this red range here is where I thought I would be for like the last 5K, maybe the last 10K, but instead I bumped that up early thinking that this was going to be, we had great weather, course was nice. You know, I just thought everything was like lining up for me, so I just went after it. And for a while it was great. For a while it was fine. I caught up to the 3:10 pace group, and I passed the 3:10 pace group, and I started passing more and more people there. It felt great. And in my mind, I knew what I was doing wasn't all that smart. And so I was like, I got to find a group to stay with, slow down, and just like tuck in and run with them for a while. And every time I found a new group, I would slow down to what they were running, and I just felt like, oh no, this is way too slow. And because I would look at the pace on the watch, again, focusing too much on where my mind wanted to be rather than where my body was telling me to be. And I was like, no, I'm just going to keep going. And so I spent the whole race running away from people, which again was a real big tactical error on my part. It's something that I've done before, and I think now I'm finally learning it, that I really should have tucked in. I think probably what's going on is it takes a second for the foot pod to adjust pace. So I think as I'm going from the pace that I'm catching people, then I slow down to like the group pace to see where they're at. I think the pace that it shows me on the watch overcorrects. I think if I'd stayed there for a little bit longer and then like gave it like 30 seconds or a minute, that would definitely give me a better gauge of where those people were at. I mean, ultimately those people were ahead of me. So it's like, they were running a relatively fast pace. So that's something else, another lesson that I can learn and draw is I do need to do better and be more patient. I really need to be a lot more patient this entire stretch. But I felt like for a long time things were going really well. And then right around here, which is the almost 22 mile mark for me, but it was at that point my watch was giving me about 0.25 miles 0.5 miles even, about 0.25 miles or so ahead of what like the race distance was. So around like 21 and a half, 21 3/4, probably 21 and a half, because this was, I think, an aid station, and there was aid stations every mile and a half. So this is probably about 21 and a half where I walked through a water station to try to like just drink a little bit more water, and then catch my breath a little bit. Now, on this day, I brought 5 gels with me. I ended up only needing 4 towards the end when I was dying. I didn't feel like I needed more sugar. There's other races where I'm like, I wish I had another gel or even 2 more gels with me. That wasn't the case this day. I didn't need it. GI was relatively fine. Didn't feel hungry at all throughout the race. So in terms of nutrition and hydration, I think I executed about as well as I'm capable of executing, or in terms of meeting what my body needs. I just think that I ran too hot for this 10-mile stretch. And so, or at least like a 9 or 8 mile stretch. But, what I do take from this stretch is that I am right in that, like, that 172 to 173 heart rate is about where my body flips over from aerobic to anaerobic. So I have to reserve that and not get there until I'm in like the last about 5K, maybe a little bit longer, but really about that last 5K of the race. And before the race, before that point in the race, the other 23 miles, I need to just be a lot more disciplined and stay within my range of that, like, high 160s to like the very, very low 170s, not even to basically not over a 171 or 172. It seems like really finite numbers, but as I was running, I definitely could feel like the difference in there. And so these spikes, I definitely felt these spikes here when the heart rate like jumped up a little bit. And they're jumping up on very small differences in altitude. So we're looking here, 170 as we're going down or up, 170.5 feet to 174 feet. That caused a jump. A little mini spike in my heart rate. So just 4 feet was enough for me, which again, I think is an indicator of my level of fitness. I've got a lot of work to do in terms of building that respiratory and cardiac strength. So that's what's going on here. This is the anatomy of hitting the wall. This is kind of what it looks like in the miles before that. The thing that I do take solace of is that, like, I was able to maintain this higher heart rate, at least higher heart rate for me, for a good 7 or 8 miles before I really start to feel it. I think I start to feel it after that uphill there. I think this little uphill where I go from 130 feet to 144.7 really just took it out of me, at least for trying to run a road marathon pace. And so, yeah, that's really where I started to feel it. So I had about 7 miles of really what I think is good marathon, like run your heart out kind of pace. I just put it in the wrong spot, which is something that I've done before. So, but this time, lesson learned. All right, so let's take a look at the death march from here on out, and we'll look at, so from mile where were we at, 23 to the end. Yeah, this is what a wall looks like. And so I go from 171. At this point, I'm walking, and my legs are dead. So I felt it on this particular day in both of my hip joints. And so that's could be the 1 millimeter heel drop starting to catch up to me at the end. I didn't think that it was bothering me, but towards the end, I felt like my hip sockets hurt a little bit, but mainly I felt the pain, just, that heaviness in my quads. A little bit different than what I felt in Chicago, but I think pretty much the same thing we were talking about here. And I just couldn't pick up my legs. And at this point I knew, like, the day that I wanted in my mind was definitely gone. And even the day that I'm capable of running is definitely gone. I knew this right away. And so at that point, I talk a lot about mental strength, but, a lot of the drive was just gone at this point. And so here I'm throwing myself a bunch of little mini pity parties. So there was 8 bouts of walking in this stretch, basically coinciding. Anytime I saw even the littlest hill, I would start running up part of it, and then I'm like, what am I killing myself for? I'm like, this stinks. I hate this. I keep messing it up, and I'm just not running up any of the hills. And then at this point, it takes me till about mile 25 and change before I start seeing the downtown or getting into downtown. And then I'm realizing probably around like this point, the only reason that I'm upset is because I had this expectation in my mind, or hope or fantasy in my mind, that I would have a very different day that I've been having. But this was the best day that my body could deliver, given my level of fitness and all the other conditions. And had this been just a regular long run or some other day with some other different set of, it's the expectations that made today unsuccessful. And so I tried to turn that thinking around and tried to think about how I was actually having fun out there. There was lots of crowds out there that I could interact with. It was a great day. It was a beautiful day to run, and I got a lot of useful information out of this run. And so I was able to kind of shift my focus and enjoy the last about half mile or so of the race as you're running through the downtown area. There's so much energy coming from the crowd there at this point. Hips aren't bothering me as much anymore, but quads are still dead. My hammies are locking up as well. And so it's just, but I'm running through it, limping through it anyway, and coming to the finish. And ultimately, by the time I crossed the line, whatever that time was, I was happy with the result. And so to circle back to kind of like the two main points that I started out with in terms of the race plan execution, I think looking at the heart rate data, I feel good that running at that 168 range seemed to work really well and gave me a pretty decent pace, something that I think would have put me in about the 310, maybe a little bit after range. And so the difference between what I'm capable of doing and what I executed, I think, is about 7 minutes, about 310 to about 317. So it's about 7 minutes. So I had a lot of room where I could have really fixed things had I been more restrained. So my initial concerns in terms of this time isn't what I want led me to do things that ultimately picked up time in the short run, but cost me dearly in the end. And that's a lesson that it's taken me 2 times in a row now to have that happen to me, to be able to figure that out. So the next time I will definitely be more restrained and kind of hold myself back. The other thing to pull from today is in that difference between the mind's goal pace and realizing that what I want can be very different from what my body can deliver, is that I should have just done what I've been doing through all my low heart rate training, which is to run with a screen that doesn't show me the actual pace as I'm running. I know what my heart rates are going to be. I know that at those levels now, having run a marathon like this after training with low heart rate, not for as much as low heart rate training really takes to kind of onboard, but having done it for at least one cycle, is I know that like those are the numbers that are good for me and my level of fitness and my age in terms of where I could be running throughout most of the race. So now I know that up till about mile 20 through mile 23, somewhere in that range, is where I should be staying around 168, maybe up to 170. But then after that, I can let it go for the last 5. And I know that now, based on that 13 to 23, that chunk in the middle, that I know that that's a time where I can, at that point, really let go. Maybe I could push that earlier up to like mile 20 and get a good solid 10K at the end, but really that's what my body can handle. So now I have a lot of great information going into not only a race plan for next time, but also thinking about it that way helped me realize that the reason why I don't think it's going to matter for me as much to have pace on my watch during a race anymore is that, you know, what I hope for is great up till about the taper. But from the taper on until the actual race day and through the time you cross the finish line, what I hope for is irrelevant, and what I'm capable of is what's relevant. And so that's what's going to make me happy, is running to what I'm capable of, to my potential, and not about what some other number. The number, I think, will come to me. The goal is to make it so that way, not that I can run at a higher heart rate for longer, although I do kind of want that, and hopefully there's some strength that I can work on there in the next 12, 13 weeks. But the goal is to make what does the pace at 168 beats per minute for me correlate to. So how do I make that stronger? So I got to work more on that heart strength and overall slow twitch muscle strength, and being able to make that 168 beats per minute really, really fast. Right now, that correlates to about 7 minutes per mile, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. I'd like to make it so that 168 per minute is much faster. I'd like to get it to like 650, 640. So that's going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of time. More time than I have for even the next marathon, I think. But I have direction for where I want to go next. I pulled a lot of great data from this race, my first race with low heart rate training. So lots of great stuff to take away with me. Had a great time in a great city with great race conditions. And the number is what it is, and we will build on it from here moving forward. If you have any other questions about the data that I've showed you guys, or any other questions about the race, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'd love to talk to you guys about it more down there. But that's all I have for today's video. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?